For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon Derehove. Political analyst Aubrey Machiki joins me to discuss the ruling alliance and politics in South Africa. In your column, you state that the ruling party and the alliance with COSATU and the SACP is a mess. Why do you say this, and what effect will this have on the South African political landscape?
Well, it seems to me that the alliance is not succeeding in dealing with the ghosts of the factionalism that have been haunting it since around 2005. We sit now with a COSATU that seems to be headed towards a split. We sit with an ANC that seems to be the source and origin of tensions that you find in the alliance. You sit with an SACP that seems to be more committed to the Zuma coalition or the Zuma faction than it is to the communist cause. So, in short, to the extent that there may have been a center that holds the alliance together, that center does not seem to be holding.
What effect could it have on South Africa's landscape?
Well, it can have an effect on both the economic and political space. Politically, the good thing about the fact that there is an attempt on the part of some who want to leave COSATU to form a political movement on the left of the ANC is that our choices as ordinary citizens might be expanded, and therefore that would be something that is good for our democracy. On the other hand, given the fact that the expansion is caused by internal battles or is a product of internal battles in COSATU, in the labor space, one of two things can happen. Stability may descend because workers might have more choices, and as unions, rival unions compete, they might prioritize the needs of workers and de-emphasize the political dimension, in which case, of course, sectors of the economy and the economy as a whole would benefit. But it could also go the other way, to the extent that the competition might lead to conflict and more instability in sectors such as the mining sector.
After the Mangaung conference in 2012, the ANC seemed to be more united behind President Jacob Zuma than at Polokwane in 2008. However, this sentiment does not seem to be shared by the electorate, as was witnessed by their booing and jeering at former President Nelson Mandela's memorial this week. What's your opinion on this?
Well, this takes us to next month's column, but we can give readers a taste of what is coming. The fact that President Jacob Zuma was booed, I think, is an indication of the growing unhappiness amongst ordinary South Africans, not only about the president, but also about the ANC. Because increasingly, the voice and the tone of ANC spokespeople and government spokespeople is that of people who talk down to us as citizens, who are dismissive. But it seems also to me that the Nkandla security upgrade imbroglio may be much bigger as a source of concern among citizens than the ANC or the government might have thought initially.
So they should actually look out for that because they're sort of downplaying the whole thing.
Well, you know, there are two things you do under these circumstances. The moment there are signs that citizens are unhappy, and you have the kind of response you saw at the memorial service for Nelson Mandela, with sections of the crowd booing the president. As a political party, at a public level, you deny that this is an indication that citizens are unhappy about the government, the ruling party, or the president. But one hopes that with such denial, there is acknowledgement of the problem in the private space. Because if there is denial both publicly and privately, then the ANC will not be fully prepared for what may come next year.
Now, I read recently that should the public react to their president in other nations, it calls for a resignation of the president. What do you think the chances are of that happening here?
Well, here people might argue that it was a single event. They might argue that it was only a portion of those who were at the memorial service for Nelson Mandela. But at the same time, I think the ANC and the government must become increasingly responsive and sensitive to what people are saying. e-tolling in Gandla suggests to me that these have become metaphors for everything else that South African citizens are unhappy about. And the great danger we face is that of a breakdown of trust between the president and citizens.
What effect could a split in COSATU have for South Africa generally and the ruling alliance specifically?
Well, you know, if the current battles deepen and they worsen, one would then have to think quite strongly about the possibility that within the next 2 years, both COSATU and the ANC might be faced with the real danger of splitting, because there is a connection, as I said, between battles in COSATU and attempts by some in the ANC in attempts to consolidate their factional interests in the ANC. And these attempts, of course, pose real dangers to both the ANC and COSATU. And that is why I think if there is no intervention to cause a deviation from the current course, and if COSATU and the ANC stay on this current course, I think a split by both is within the realm of possibility.
You state that the corruption, lack of leadership and lack of courage we see in the ANC and the alliance today are probably not new. Please elaborate on this statement.
Well, when men and women of courage keep quiet, when things that are ignoble or even evil in the midst of injustice or in the midst of corruption and behavior that is not in the national interest, that is not in the interest of the most disadvantaged among us. If men and women of courage keep quiet, obviously, these things will continue. Now, people keep on asking why it is that the alliance finds itself in this state, when we all know that there are men and women of courage in the SACP, in COSATU, and the ANC. And it seems to me that primarily it might be the lack of courage on the part of those who are not part of this disturbing culture of looting, of pursuing narrow political and economic interests, who actually pose a danger to the alliance, to the ANC, and to the nation as a whole by keeping quiet.
So the enemy is within?
Well, the enemy is within in this way. Oliver Tambo made the point that the greatest force that can defeat the ANC is the ANC itself. That if the ANC one day ceases to be, it will be because it had succeeded in the task of self-destruction. So it seems there are forces, one would even say forces of counter-revolution, that have embedded themselves inside the ANC and the alliance. And the main challenge facing the ANC and the alliance is to recognize that this is indeed the truth about aspects of what is happening in the alliance and the ANC. And therefore, instead of always looking outside for forces and sources of counter-revolution, they must start spending more time looking inside for such sources and causes of counter-revolution. Some of them may not intend to be counter-revolutionary in what they do, but the effect of what they do and the choices they make are indeed counter-revolutionary.
That was political analyst Aubrey Machiki discussing the ruling alliance and politics in South Africa.